Before the city reveals itself, the mountains make their presence known. Altitude arrives first, long before any trace of stone walls or carefully cut terraces becomes visible. The air grows thin, slopes rise steeply, folding into one another in patterns that seem to repeat endlessly. Here, clouds don't simply pass overhead. They move directly through the landscape itself, consuming entire valleys before releasing them again with no apparent pattern. The way sound carries feels different in this environment. Judging distance becomes oddly uncertain. Everything about the terrain suggests impermanence. Yet this is precisely the location where the Incas constructed one of their most remarkable urban achievements. Machu Picchu doesn't make a dramatic entrance. The city reveals itself the way hidden things do, slowly, with a kind of reluctance. Stone steps begin to emerge through layers of mist. Terraces grip mountainsides that appear far too vertical to support any structure. The walls follow curves with such exactness that the placement feels deliberate, almost as though the mountain had participated in deciding the arrangement. Visibility was never the intention for this place. No broad pathways lead toward it. There are no sweeping approaches constructed to create impressions from a distance. Machu Picchu was deliberately concealed, not buried beneath jungle growth like Angkor, but elevated well beyond the reach of casual access. Getting here demanded physical effort, specific knowledge, and clear purpose. This wasn't a capital designed to attract masses of people. It served a different function entirely, something more restrained, more carefully managed. The Incas established a settlement above the cloud line that seemed to exist between different realms. Understanding what Machu Picchu represents requires setting aside contemporary assumptions about urban centers. This wasn't a hub where commerce flowed or administrative decisions were made. Expansion was never part of its purpose. Each stone was positioned with careful restraint. Each terrace was carved not only to support crops, but to stabilize the mountain beneath it. The city wasn't forced upon the landscape. It was worked out in conversation with it. The location itself was chosen with intention, and the choice carried deep symbolic weight. For the Incas, mountains held sacred status. Peaks weren't simply obstacles to overcome. They were conscious entities, living forces that observed, offered protection, and required reverence. Constructing anything here wasn't an act of conquest. It was an act of joining with something already present. Isolation gave the city its particular kind of authority. Looking up from the valleys below, Machu Picchu remains completely invisible. From higher vantage points, it appears entirely out of reach. Weather conditions provide constant concealment. The terrain itself acts as a defensive barrier. The landscape enforces separation without any need for walls. This was designed as a space for a carefully limited group: priests, nobility, attendants, individuals whose daily existence revolved around ritual, observance, celestial tracking, and maintained order rather than commerce or military action. Despite its remoteness, though, Machu Picchu was never truly isolated from the wider world. Pathways made of stone connected it to an expansive imperial communication system. Messages traveled across mountainous terrain with surprising speed. Food supplies, construction materials, and human movement all followed carefully controlled patterns. The city functioned not as a central point of power, but as one strategically positioned node within a larger network that prioritized equilibrium over prominence. Chance played no role in what was built here. The terraces served purposes beyond agricultural production. They stabilized slopes and prevented devastating landslides. Beneath the city's surface, elaborate drainage systems channeled water away before erosion could take hold. Rain wasn't treated as a threat in this place. It was anticipated, directed, and released with intention. The mountain wasn't subdued. It was carefully observed and responded to. This state of balance persisted for a significant period. Then, with no dramatic final chapter, Machu Picchu became empty. There was no fire-consuming structures, no military siege, no evidence of violent collapse preserved in the stonework. The inhabitants simply departed. The pathways remained intact. The city stood complete, suspended above the clouds while the world in the valleys below underwent transformation. Unlike what happened at Angkor, jungle vegetation didn't immediately reclaim the structures. The high altitude offered protection. The silence became a form of preservation. Machu Picchu didn't experience a fall from power. Instead, it withdrew from the historical narrative entirely. The quiet that descended after Machu Picchu was abandoned carried a different quality than what occurred at Angkor. In this case, there was no gradual consumption by creeping jungle growth, no slow erasure of monumental scale. The city remained almost precisely as it had been when people last walked its terraces, held in place by altitude and removed from time's usual effects. The stones maintained their clean edges. Terraces kept their original forms. The drainage channels continued performing their engineered function long after human hands stopped maintaining them. This wasn't a process of deterioration, it was more like a suspension. To grasp why Machu Picchu could be left in such pristine condition, you need to understand how power functioned within Inca civilization. Authority didn't anchor itself to a single permanent location. Cities weren't expected to endure indefinitely. They fulfilled specific roles, and when circumstances shifted, populations relocated. What held significance wasn't the physical city itself, but rather the interconnected network it participated in. Roads, ceremonial practices, seasonal rhythms, and political control all moved across the Andes, following patterns designed for mobility rather than fixed permanence. Machu Picchu operated according to that same logic. Everything about its design points toward purposefulness without unnecessary elaboration. The overall scale remains modest, the population capacity was strictly limited. The architecture achieves precision without becoming monumental in the way imperial centers typically are. This wasn't constructed as a place meant to grow larger over time. It was built to contain specific things: specialized knowledge, ritual practices, astronomical observation, spiritual alignment. Its importance came from where it was positioned, not from how large it became. The Incas grasped something essential about mountainous terrain. Stability is never guaranteed. Slopes experience constant movement, rainfall tests every exposed surface. Gravitational forces never cease their pull. Machu Picchu's design responds to these realities with a kind of humility. The terraces absorb environmental pressure. Stones fit together without mortar, allowing them to flex rather than crack under stress. Water receives clear pathways throughout the entire structure, permitted to flow rather than forced to remain contained. The city persists not through resistance to natural forces, but through active cooperation with them. That cooperation demanded continuous attentiveness. Life in this location meant maintaining constant awareness, tracking weather patterns, monitoring soil conditions, following celestial movements. Machu Picchu functioned as much like a precision instrument as it did a human settlement. Specific window openings align with solstice positions. Particular stones catch sunlight at exact moments throughout the year. The city observes the sky while simultaneously anchoring the earth beneath its foundations. These weren't merely symbolic decorative choices, they served actual functions. Timekeeping, maintaining cosmic order, and then the established order underwent fundamental change. Spanish colonizers didn't destroy Machu Picchu. They never located it. The city's isolation, which had originally defined its purpose, became the very thing that protected it. When Inca civilization faced disruption elsewhere, through epidemic disease, military conquest, and the breakdown of political authority, No compelling reason existed to return to this remote location. The networks that had sustained the city's function fell apart. Roads lost their significance. Ritual practices lost their cultural context. Machu Picchu remained structurally perfect, but it had become functionally irrelevant. So the decision was made to leave it intact. Centuries moved forward. Clouds continued their endless passage through the valleys. The stonework continued to hold firm, without large populations present, without grazing livestock, without repeated human disturbance. The usual erosion processes slowed dramatically. Vegetation began to creep in, but carefully, not aggressively. The city didn't disappear from the landscape. It simply waited. When Machu Picchu finally re-entered global consciousness, its condition appeared remarkably unchanged. This created a compelling but misleading impression that the site had been frozen in time somehow, completely untouched by historical forces. The truth is more nuanced. Abandonment had provided protection. The absence of continued use preserved the physical structures, but it simultaneously severed the connection to memory. The city survived in material form, but its original meaning became separated from the culture that had created it. What visitors encountered was breathtaking stonework and architectural achievement. What they couldn't perceive was the original function. Machu Picchu became labeled a mystery city, not because it was inherently unknowable. It appeared mysterious because its purpose no longer aligned with the categories that modern observers brought to the site. It wasn't a traditional capital, not a military fortress, not a commercial marketplace. It refused to fit established labels, and that refusal reveals more about contemporary assumptions than it does about ancient intentions. The city suspended above the clouds was never designed with permanence as its goal. Precision was what mattered, and when precision becomes detached from the system that gave it meaning, silence is what remains. For the Incas, landscape was never a neutral backdrop. Mountains weren't merely scenery to be appreciated, they were conscious beings, living entities possessing agency, holding memory, wielding power. Each peak existed within a hierarchy of sacred geography that fundamentally shaped how the world was conceptualized and navigated. Rivers, individual stones, and walking paths weren't simply physical elements in the environment. They actively participated in a larger cosmic order. Machu Picchu occupies a position precisely at the convergence of these concepts, situated not merely for defensive advantage or physical isolation, but for deeper significance. The city nestles between peaks that already carried sacred status long before any construction began. From this vantage point, carefully arranged, sightlines connect Machu Picchu to distant mountains, establishing a network of visual relationships that held profound importance in Inca cosmology. This location was selected not because the space was empty and available, but because it already possessed inherent power. Building here wasn't about claiming territory. It was about entering into meaningful dialogue with forces already present. Every element of the city's design reflects this ongoing negotiation. Walls trace the mountain's natural contours rather than cutting sharply against them. Terraces mirror the slope's existing patterns, reinforcing them instead of attempting replacement. Even the city's overall layout avoids rigid, geometric symmetry, choosing balance over assertion of dominance. Machu Picchu gives the impression less of something placed upon the land and more of something that emerged organically from it. This relationship extended beyond physical architecture into temporal dimensions as well. The Incas structured their entire worldview around cyclical patterns, seasonal changes, agricultural rhythms, celestial movements through the sky. Machu Picchu served as a location where these cycles could be carefully observed and brought into proper alignment. Certain architectural elements frame the rising sun at specific times throughout the year. Particular stones mark transitional moments that held significance for planting schedules, ritual ceremonies, and governance decisions. The city achieved precision not only in spatial terms, it was equally precise in temporal terms. Existing here meant living embedded within a living calendar. This same precision also explains why Machu Picchu was never intended to accommodate large populations. Too many inhabitants would have disrupted the delicate balance the city depended upon. The design assumes careful attention, constant awareness, and deliberate restraint. It was meant for specialists, individuals specifically tasked with maintaining harmony between celestial forces, terrestrial landscape, and human society. When that harmony could no longer be sustained, the city's fundamental purpose dissolved, which is why it was left structurally intact. Unlike urban centers designed around trade or military defense, Machu Picchu didn't collapse when its population departed. Nothing essential was stripped away. Nothing was repurposed on any significant scale. The city simply ceased to be actively used, and without ongoing pressure from human activity, it endured. Stones remained locked in their positions. Drainage systems kept performing their designed function. The mountain continued, supporting what had been constructed in cooperative relationship with it. Centuries later, when the city was encountered again by outside observers, this remarkable intactness was misinterpreted as evidence of permanence. The site appeared eternal. It felt as though nothing had ever touched it. But Machu Picchu was never designed to last forever. It was designed to be correct, appropriate for a particular historical moment, under specific environmental conditions, within a particular cultural worldview. That worldview didn't survive the colonial encounter. The Incas' understanding of landscape, temporal cycles, and political authority couldn't be separated from their broader social system. When that system fractured under external pressure, the meanings embedded in places like Machu Picchu fractured along with it. The city became mute, not because it was physically destroyed, but because the interpretive language required to read its purpose was lost. This is what distinguishes Machu Picchu from many other ancient archaeological sites. It doesn't confront visitors with fragmentary ruins that demand imaginative reconstruction. Instead, it confronts them with completeness that demands interpretation. Everything remains present, but the reason for its presence is no longer self-evident. And that tension existing between physical preservation and lost understanding is where Machu Picchu begins to transcend archaeology and move into philosophical reflection. The city doesn't pose questions about why abandonment occurred. It poses questions about whether places can retain significance once the systems that originally gave them purpose have disappeared. High above the clouds, surrounded by mountains that have outlasted multiple empires, Machu Picchu continues to wait inside that unresolved question. That quality of waiting gives Machu Picchu its distinctive weight. The site doesn't confront visitors with destruction or loss in conventional terms. Instead, what it presents is continuity stripped of context. The stones still maintain their precise alignments. The terraces still hold their shapes. Water still flows along the paths it was engineered to follow. Function continues to exist, but meaning has loosened its grip. The city still works mechanically, even though no one retains exact memory of why it was originally constructed. This creates an unusual form of discomfort. Most ancient sites ask us to imagine what has been lost. Machu Picchu asks us to explain what still remains. Modern researchers often search for a single defining purpose: a royal retreat, a religious sanctuary, an astronomical observatory. Each explanation captures part of the truth, but none of them prove sufficient in isolation. Machu Picchu resists simplification because it was never designed around a single function. It served as a convergence point. Political authority, ritual practice, agricultural knowledge, and cosmological observation all overlapped here. in carefully maintained balance. Remove any single element, and the city still stands physically. Remove the overarching system that held them together, and the city becomes enigmatic. This is what precision costs. Machu Picchu was constructed to operate within a worldview that understood land as fundamentally relational, time as cyclical rather than linear, and power as something embedded in harmony rather than domination. When that worldview collapsed under colonial disruption, the city lost its interpretive framework. The stones didn't crack or crumble. The meaning did. What persisted was an artifact separated from its language. And yet, the city doesn't convey emptiness. Standing among the terraces, it becomes difficult to escape the sensation that Machu Picchu is still performing some kind of work. The mountains still create frames for the sky, light still strikes stone at intentional angles, the city still mediates between upper and lower realms, between solid earth and open atmosphere. Its original role may have become obscured, but its presence continues shaping how people perceive the space. It slows physical movement. It draws attention outward, toward the surrounding landscape rather than inward, toward acquisition and consumption. In this way, Machu Picchu exerts subtle influence on the contemporary world. Not through direct instruction, but through contrast. It demonstrates what urban design looks like when it's not built around endless expansion, not structured to dominate available resources, not optimized for perpetual growth. Its restraint feels almost radical when measured against contemporary standards. Everything here operates within limits. Space is finite, population is capped. The land itself dictates what forms are possible. This restraint isn't about nostalgia for the past. It represents a design philosophy. The Incas weren't lacking in ambition. They constructed one of the most extensive road networks the ancient world ever saw. They governed vast territories across some of the most challenging terrain on the planet. But Machu Picchu reveals a different aspect of that ambition, one focused on alignment rather than accumulation. The city suggests that certain places are meant to achieve exactness, not size, correctness, not permanence. That idea sits uncomfortably in the modern imagination. Today, Machu Picchu gets framed as a tourist destination. Access paths are carefully managed, visitor numbers are regulated, the city receives protection precisely because it is finite. In a world accustomed to scaling solutions upward indefinitely, Machu Picchu survives by being constrained. Its continued endurance now depends on maintaining limits, not pursuing expansion. This shift mirrors its original logic more closely than might initially appear. Machu Picchu was never designed to absorb unlimited pressure. It was designed to hold balance. Once that balance was no longer culturally intelligible, the city stepped aside. It didn't fall into ruin, it withdrew. And in making that withdrawal, it preserved itself in a way that few urban centers ever manage. The story continues to unfold not through stonework, but through ongoing interpretation. Each generation brings new questions to the site, questions shaped by its own anxieties surrounding sustainability, meaning, and control. Machu Picchu doesn't answer them directly, it simply demonstrates that another approach to building once existed, one that prioritized relationship over reach, precision over permanence. High above the valleys, the city remains suspended between different worlds, not lost, not fully understood, intact but unresolved. And that unresolved quality is what keeps its story alive long after the clouds roll through and the mountains reclaim the horizon once again. As that unresolved quality settles in, Machu Picchu begins to alter how time itself feels. The city doesn't pull the past forward through spectacle. Instead, it slows the present down. Movement becomes more deliberate. Sound grows thinner. Attention expands outward. The altitude, the quality of light, the precision of stonework, all combined to make haste feel inappropriate. This wasn't a city designed for rushed passage, and it resists being rushed even now. That resistance forms part of its meaning. Machu Picchu endures because it was constructed with limits that modern urban centers often avoid. Its boundaries were clearly defined, its population remained restrained, its resources were carefully matched to its environmental setting. The city never attempted to become indispensable. It existed to fulfill a role, not to accumulate power indefinitely. When that role could no longer be sustained, the city didn't adapt endlessly. It stepped back. This is difficult to reconcile with modern instincts. Today, urban centers are expected to grow or fail. Systems are designed to scale, to absorb demand, to push outward. Machu Picchu offers a different logic, one in which success is measured by fit rather than expansion, by how well a place aligns with its environment, its culture, its moment in time. The Incas understood that alignment is temporary. Mountains shift, climates vary, political realities change. Machu Picchu was built with an awareness that correctness mattered more than longevity. It didn't seek to outlast the world, it sought to exist properly within it. When the world changed, the city didn't resist. It withdrew, intact. This withdrawal is often mistaken for mystery, but it is closer to coherence. Machu Picchu didn't survive by accident. It survived because it was never overextended. Its engineering absorbed stress rather than amplifying it. Its isolation limited damage. Its abandonment prevented reuse and reinvention. The city's preservation is the result of restraint layered on restraint. Standing above the clouds, Machu Picchu now confronts the modern world with a quiet challenge. Not to replicate its forms, but to consider its values. What would it mean to build places that are meant to be right, not endless, to design systems that know when to stop, to accept that not every success should be preserved forever? These questions do not demand answers. They invite reflection. Machu Picchu does not argue that withdrawal is superior to endurance. It shows that withdrawal can be a form of wisdom when conditions no longer align. That stepping aside can preserve meaning where persistence might dilute it. The city's silence is not emptiness. It is the absence of insistence. As the story moves toward its later movement, Machu Picchu begins to function less as an object of study and more as a point of contrast. Against modern expansion, against constant optimization, against the assumption that permanence is the highest goal, the city suggests that there are other measures of success, balance, precision, appropriateness that leave quieter traces. High above the valleys, the stones remain exactly where they were placed. The clouds continue to pass through the ruins as they always have. Nothing here is trying to continue, nothing is trying to end, and in that stillness, Machu Picchu offers its final provocation so far, that a civilization does not always leave its deepest mark by lasting the longest, but by knowing when its work is complete. And the moment Machu Picchu's work was complete, it disappeared from the rhythm of the world below, not through catastrophe, but through silence. The roads that once connected it to the wider Inca network lost their urgency. Messengers stopped arriving, ritual calendars lost their reference points. Authority no longer required presence here. What had once been a node in a living system became a place without demand, and without demand, there was no reason to return. This is where Machu Picchu crosses a boundary that most cities never do. It was abandoned at the exact moment when abandonment could preserve it. There was no population pressure to repurpose stone, no livestock to erode terraces, no continuous occupation to slowly distort its form. The city was left whole, not because it was sacred in isolation, but because it had become unnecessary. And in becoming unnecessary, it was protected from the very processes that usually erase cities from history. The clouds became its shield, the altitude became its defense, the silence became its archive. For generations, Machu Picchu existed in parallel with history rather than inside it. Empires rose and fell elsewhere, languages shifted, borders were redrawn. Below, the world fractured and reassembled itself repeatedly. Above, the city remained unchanged, not frozen, but unengaged. This separation matters. Machu Picchu was not forgotten because it was hidden, it was forgotten because it no longer mattered to power. Memory follows utility. When a place no longer organizes life, it drifts out of narrative. The Incas did not record abandonment because abandonment was not failure, it was conclusion. That distinction is easy to miss from a modern perspective. Today, we tend to measure significance by endurance. What lasts is assumed to matter more. Machu Picchu disrupts that logic. It mattered intensely for a brief window, then stopped mattering at all. By design, not by collapse. Its preservation is not proof of timeless importance. It is evidence of restraint. This is the quiet truth at the heart of the city. Machu Picchu did not aspire to permanence. It aspired to correctness. Once correctness could no longer be maintained within the changing world, the city stepped aside. It did not demand adaptation. It did not seek reinvention. It accepted completion. And in doing so, it avoided the long erosion that defines most urban histories. The city above the clouds did not fall out of history. History moved on without it. That movement, away from Machu Picchu, away from its role, away from its meaning, is what defines the end of this phase of the story. What comes next is not about life in the city, but about absence, about how a place can remain physically present while becoming culturally invisible. And with that shift, the narrative is ready to move again. For centuries, Machu Picchu existed without witnesses. The mountains did not forget it, but they did not remember it either. They simply held it. Clouds moved through the ruins the way they always had, erasing and revealing the city dozens of times a day. Seasons passed without ceremony. The stonework endured storms, earthquakes, and silence with equal indifference. Nothing here asked to be seen. Below, the world changed shape. Colonial cities grew in valleys and along coasts. Roads were cut where commerce demanded them. Power reorganized itself around extraction, trade, and administration. The high Andes became peripheral. Places passed through, not destinations. Machu Picchu sat above all of this, not hidden so much as irrelevant. It was not erased from memory by violence. It slipped out of it through disuse. This long invisibility shaped how the city would later be understood. When Machu Picchu finally entered global awareness, it did so abruptly, almost violently, through the shock of recognition. A place so intact did not fit expectations of what the past was supposed to look like. Ruins were meant to be broken, scattered, obviously old. Machu Picchu looked composed, intentional, as if it had been waiting. This created a powerful illusion that the city had been lost and then found, frozen in time, unchanged. In reality, it had never been frozen. It had simply been left alone. The difference matters. Preservation through neglect is not the same as preservation through care. One erases context. The other maintains it. Early interpretations struggled with this distinction. Machu Picchu was described as a mystery, a forgotten capital, a refuge, a fortress. Each label tried to anchor the city to familiar categories. Each one failed in subtle ways. The problem was not lack of information, but mismatch of perspective. Observers were looking for a city that behaved like other cities. Machu Picchu did not. It had no markets because it was not commercial, no fortifications because it was not defensive, no signs of continuous habitation because it was not meant to persist indefinitely. The city did not lack purpose. It had too much specificity to be easily recognized. As research deepened, a different picture began to emerge. Machu Picchu was understood less as a center of power and more as a carefully placed instrument within a larger imperial system. Its isolation was not accidental, its size was not incomplete. Its abandonment was not catastrophic. Each feature made sense once the city was read on its own terms. But this understanding arrived late. By the time Machu Picchu was being interpreted accurately, the world encountering it was already very different from the one that built it. The city was absorbed into narratives shaped by tourism, national identity, and global fascination with the lost. Its silence was filled with explanation. Its restraint was overwhelmed by attention. This created a new tension. Machu Picchu had survived because it had been left alone. Now it had to survive being seen. The pathways underwent formalization. Entry became subject to regulation. Schedules and planned itineraries now included the city as a destination. Preservation shifted from something that happened passively to something actively managed. Machu Picchu found itself embedded within a system. Once more, no longer an Inca framework, but a contemporary one structured around visitor movement, documentary evidence, and external demand. The question repeating itself wasn't about the city's capacity to endure, but rather about the conditions under which that endurance would occur. High above the valleys, the stonework remained physically unchanged. What underwent transformation was the meaning people projected onto those stones. The city suspended above the clouds had re-entered the historical record, but history itself was no longer the quiet thing it had once withdrawn from. That re-entry lacked gentleness. The moment Machu Picchu returned to global imagination, it arrived as something to be desired, captured in photographs, added to schedules, analyzed in detail, consumed as experience. The very characteristics that had sheltered it across centuries, its remoteness, its restraint, its functional specificity, became precisely the reasons people wanted to reach it. The city transitioned from irrelevant to suddenly essential, absorbed into worldwide narratives about discovery, wonder, and what has been lost. This transformation altered Machu Picchu in ways more subtle than visible structural damage. The city began occupying two positions simultaneously. One was the physical stone settlement itself, still achieving precision, still holding its alignments, still balanced on the mountainside exactly as it had been when last inhabited. The other was conceptual, constructed through travel, brochures, documentary films, and visitor expectations. Within this second version, the city became symbolic rather than functional, a destination rather than a working system. Meaning underwent simplification so it could travel more easily. That process of simplification extracted a price. The Incas had constructed Machu Picchu with resistance to excess built into its design. Modern attention returned it to a world that finds accepting. Limits difficult, foot traffic levels increased, infrastructure developed around the site to accommodate visitors. Preservation became an ongoing negotiation between providing access and maintaining protection. The city that had once persisted through withdrawal now faced the challenge of surviving through active management. This represents a recognizable paradox. Places preserved specifically because of their fragility often face endangerment from the very interests seeking to protect them. Machu Picchu now relies on systems as intricate in their own manner as the Inca networks that originally sustained it. Permit systems, visitor quotas, monitoring, protocols, restoration efforts, a different form of coordination, responding to different environmental pressures, but equally demanding. Despite all this, though, something fundamental remains preserved. The city continues refusing to fully explain itself. No informational plaque or guided tour can compress its meaning into a single declarative sentence. The deeper the study becomes, the clearer it grows that Machu Picchu wasn't constructed to create impressions on future generations. It was built to operate within a worldview that no longer has living representatives. That historical distance cannot be entirely bridged through research alone. Certain aspects will inevitably remain matters of interpretation. This resistance forms part of its authority. Machu Picchu doesn't surrender a definitive answer about its original nature. What it reveals instead is how heavily meaning depends on surrounding context. Remove the larger system, and precision transforms into puzzle. Remove the cultural worldview, and alignment becomes mere curiosity. The city demonstrates that understanding requires not just physical evidence, but appropriate frameworks for interpreting that evidence. As the narrative pushes deeper into this phase, Machu Picchu begins reflecting contemporary dilemmas more directly. How does one preserve something without converting it into spectacle? How does protection work for a place whose original purpose no longer has application? How can restraint be honored within a world fundamentally driven by demand? The Incas resolved these tensions through departure. Contemporary society attempts resolution through continued presence. High above the valleys, the city contains both approaches without endorsing either one. It neither welcomes attention nor actively rejects it. It simply exists, compelling those who encounter it to face the gap between physical presence and genuine understanding. And within that tension between what Machu Picchu originally was, what it currently is, and what people make it become, the story continues, developing not toward any final resolution, but toward ongoing reflection. Reflection represents the state where Machu Picchu settles most naturally. The city doesn't collapse under the weight of interpretation, but it does bend interpretation itself. Each attempt to define the site reveals more about whoever is doing the defining than about the place being defined. For some observers, Machu Picchu becomes a symbol representing lost wisdom. For others, it stands as testament to engineering achievement without modern tools. For many, it simply provokes awe, stone and sky arranged with such perfection that explanation feels secondary to experience. None of these responses contain error. They're incomplete by structural necessity. This incompleteness isn't a deficiency. It represents the condition Machu Picchu was always intended to exist within. The Incas didn't design their city to be decoded by unfamiliar strangers arriving centuries later. They designed it to function within shared cultural understanding of mountains as conscious living entities, of time as cyclical rather than linear, of power as achieved through alignment rather than accumulation. Once that shared understanding disappeared from living practice, meaning could no longer transfer cleanly across the gap. What persisted was architectural form stripped of its original language. Modern preservation efforts attempt to bridge that divide, but they cannot fully close it. Stone can undergo stabilization, pathways can receive management, visitor numbers can be controlled, but original purpose cannot be restored once the system that generated it has vanished. Machu Picchu doesn't require restoration of meaning, it requires acknowledgement of historical distance. That distance is what provides the city with its distinctive calm. Unlike locations marked by violent destruction, Machu Picchu doesn't convey a sense of being wounded. It feels complete in a manner that resists any urgency for intervention. There's no feeling that something requires rebuilding or correction. The city doesn't demand intervention from visitors. It tolerates it, and within that tolerance, it quietly exposes a contemporary discomfort with things that don't actively seek continuation. Most urban centers function as arguments for future possibility. Machu Picchu represents an acceptance of the present moment. It was constructed to achieve exactness, not to claim eternity. When that exactness could no longer be maintained under changing conditions, withdrawal occurred. That withdrawal preserved architectural form at the expense of ongoing function. What we've inherited isn't a living city, but a perfectly articulated pause. This pause challenges modern instincts in fundamental ways. Contemporary thinking trains us to interpret abandonment as failure, preservation as success, growth as validation. Machu Picchu dissolves those categorical distinctions. It demonstrates that withdrawal can be intentional, that completion can prove more durable than endless adaptation, that a city can reach its end without experiencing breakage. As the story continues moving forward from this point, it does so with gentleness. The urgency surrounding explanation begins to fade. What persists is orientation, a developing sense of how Machu Picchu fits into broader human patterns of building, using, and eventually releasing. The city no longer requires solving, it requires proper placement. High above the clouds, it occupies an unusual position within historical record, not a beginning point, not a catastrophic collapse, but rather a conclusion that maintained its integrity. And with that understanding established, the narrative prepares to breathe again, to step beyond the phases of rediscovery and interpretation, and toward the quieter implications Machu Picchu carries for societies that still equate survival with permanence and measure success through continuation. Machu Picchu begins making its deepest sense only when it stops being treated as a singular exception. Viewed in isolation, it appears exceptional, too precise, too intact, too elevated to belong within ordinary historical patterns. But positioned back within the broader Inca world, its internal logic becomes clearer. The city wasn't an anomaly at all. It was a refinement, a concentrated expression of principles that governed an entire civilization constructed around movement, altitude, and coordination, rather than fixed permanence. The Inca Empire didn't organize itself around permanent capitals the way modern nation-states do. Power remained mobile, authority traveled. The empire functioned through networks rather than fortified centers, through roads rather than defensive walls, through flows rather than rigid borders. Machu Picchu fit perfectly into this system precisely because it was never meant to anchor the empire structurally. It was meant to support imperial function from the margins, from elevated locations where observation, ritual practice, and cosmic alignment mattered more than administrative oversight. This perspective fundamentally changes how abandonment should be understood. When the broader Inca system underwent fracture through epidemic disease, foreign conquest, and the breakdown of centralized authority, places like Machu Picchu didn't require active destruction to disappear from relevance. They lost their significance automatically. Without the functioning network, individual nodes meant nothing. Roads without messengers become merely paths through terrain. Ritual spaces without shared calendars become simply arrangements of stone. Precision stripped of its context becomes silence. The empire's organizing logic was portable across space. The city's logic was not. This explains why Machu Picchu survived while so much else vanished from the historical record. It was too functionally specific to be easily repurposed, too remote to be absorbed into emerging colonial systems, too architecturally complete to be dismantled piece by piece for materials. What made it marginal during its active life made it durable during its absence from history. Understanding this places Machu Picchu back where it properly belongs, not elevated above history in some exceptional category, but embedded deeply inside it. The city becomes a lens through which Inca worldview can be perceived more clearly, a civilization that valued integration over domination, coordination over accumulation, and correctness over mere endurance. Machu Picchu wasn't the ultimate goal of that system. It was one of the system's most refined expressions, and like many highly refined things, it proved fragile outside its proper context. The fall of the Inca Empire occurred rapidly by comparison to the slow drift that characterized Angkor's decline, but the result here carried similar qualities. Meaning drained away faster than physical structure deteriorated. The world capable of reading Machu Picchu collapsed before the city itself ever had to. What remained wasn't ruin, but articulation without any audience. This is where the story pivots again. Machu Picchu stops being merely a place encountered by modern eyes and becomes a clue pointing towards something larger: how empires organize, knowledge across space, how they distribute meaning throughout landscapes, and how rapidly those meanings can become inaccessible once the system carrying them is gone. The city isn't mysterious because crucial information is missing. It's mysterious because the framework that made information legible no longer exists, and that realization prepares the conceptual ground for what comes next. Because once Machu Picchu is perceived as part of a wider imperial logic, the central question shifts. It's no longer simply what was this place for. It becomes what kind of world produces places like this, and what happens when that world disappears. The world that produced Machu Picchu was fundamentally shaped by motion. The Inca Empire didn't expand by planting identical replicas of itself throughout every new territory. It expanded by weaving different places together into functional relationship. Roads mattered more than defensive walls. Messengers mattered more than monuments. Authority traveled with people, not through stone. This made the empire extraordinarily effective across challenging terrain, and extraordinarily vulnerable once that movement was disrupted. Machu Picchu belonged to this world of movement. It wasn't a center of command, but a place of calibration, a site where ritual practice, astronomical observation, and governance intersected away from the noise of daily administrative work. In a civilization that understood power as balance rather than domination, such places were essential. They allowed the empire to align itself properly to seasonal patterns, to mountain presence, to cycles that couldn't be controlled, only carefully read. This helps explain why Machu Picchu conveys such strong impressions of intentionality and containment. It wasn't designed to grow alongside the empire. It was meant to remain exact while the world around it shifted. That exactness depended on the empire's ability to maintain shared calendars, shared belief systems, shared flows of labor and meaning. Once those flows fractured, exactness became unsustainable. The collapse of the Inca world didn't originate from internal decay, it came from external interruption. Disease arrived first, moving faster than military forces. Authority fractured before it could respond. Roads that had once carried messages with astonishing speed carried confusion instead. The empire's greatest strength, its reliance on coordination rather than fortification, became a critical liability when coordination was broken from outside. In this moment, places like Machu Picchu didn't fall in any conventional sense. They simply lost their reason to exist. The system that animated them was gone. What followed wasn't chaos distributed everywhere, but silence in specific places. Machu Picchu didn't become a battleground or a refuge. It became unnecessary, and unnecessary places are often left intact precisely because they no longer attract pressure. No one needed to claim it, no one needed to repurpose it. The city faded without resistance. This reveals something crucial about how empires end. They don't always collapse evenly. Some places are destroyed, others are absorbed, and a few, like Machu Picchu, are bypassed entirely. These bypassed places become time capsules, not because they were protected, but because they no longer held relevance to the new order. Their survival is accidental but meaningful. Machu Picchu thus occupies a strange position in history. It is not representative of everyday Inca life, nor is it an outlier detached from the empire's logic. It is a concentrated expression of values that only make sense within a specific worldview, one that collapsed too quickly for its most precise spaces to be translated into something else. This is why the city feels complete but closed. Everything necessary for its function remains, yet nothing explains itself. The roads lead away, the alignments still catch the light, the terraces still manage water. But the reasons these things mattered have no living carriers. The empire that could read this language disappeared before it could rewrite it. As the story moves forward from here, Machu Picchu stops being a place defined by mystery and becomes a place defined by context lost too quickly to be replaced. The city's silence is not ancient, it is abrupt. And that abruptness, more than age or altitude, is what makes Machu Picchu so unsettling. Because it reminds us that meaning does not erode slowly. It can vanish all at once when the system that holds it together breaks. That sudden vanishing of meaning is what separates Machu Picchu from many other ancient places. Most cities decay slowly. Their functions blur. Their populations thin, their buildings are reused and reshaped. Machu Picchu never went through that phase. It passed directly from relevance to silence. The system that could interpret it collapsed so completely that there was no intermediate stage, no gradual forgetting, no adaptation into something new. One moment it belonged to a living worldview. The next, that worldview was gone. This is why Machu Picchu feels intact but unreachable. The Inca world was not written down in the way modern histories are. Knowledge lived in practice, rituals performed, routes walked, seasons observed, relationships maintained. When those practices were disrupted, knowledge did not linger in archives, it evaporated. Machu Picchu was not abandoned with an explanation, it was abandoned with a rupture. From that point on, the city existed in a kind of historical vacuum. It was not destroyed because it did not threaten the new order. It was not adopted because it did not serve it. Colonial power reorganized space around extraction and administration, not alignment and ritual. Valleys mattered, ports mattered, roads mattered only insofar as they moved goods efficiently. A high-altitude city designed for precision rather than productivity did not fit, so it was left alone. This accidental mercy preserved the city's form while severing it from continuity. Centuries later, when modern observers encountered Machu Picchu, they approached it with assumptions shaped by very different civilizations. They expected cities to declare their purpose, they expected ruins to show damage, they expected abandonment to leave scars. Machu Picchu offered none of these. It was whole, quiet, and resistant to categorization. That resistance was interpreted as mystery. But the mystery was not in the stones, it was in the absence of the system that once animated them. Understanding Machu Picchu requires accepting that some places cannot be fully translated across cultural collapse. You can measure walls, map terraces, trace alignments. You can reconstruct function, but you cannot resurrect the shared meaning that once made those functions self-evident. The city can be studied endlessly without ever becoming familiar. This is why Machu Picchu continues to feel unresolved. It does not deliver closure. It offers proximity without access. You can walk its paths, but not its time. You can see what was built, but not why it felt necessary. The city remains perfectly legible in form and stubbornly opaque in spirit. And in that opacity, it reflects a deeper truth about civilizations. Systems do not fail only when they are destroyed. They fail when they become unreadable, when their assumptions, values, and logics no longer align with the world interpreting them. Machu Picchu did not need to crumble to disappear. It needed only for its language to vanish. High above the valleys, the city remains in that state, complete, silent, and untranslatable. Not because it is ancient, but because it belongs to a way of seeing the world that ended too abruptly to leave interpreters behind. And that is where Machu Picchu begins to speak most clearly, not about the Incas alone, but about the fragility of meaning itself when the systems that carry it collapse faster than memory can adapt. That fragility of meaning is what ultimately pulls Machu Picchu out of archaeology and into something more intimate. The city does not challenge us with destruction. It challenges us with translation, with the realization that even when structures survive, understanding may not. That continuity of stone does not guarantee continuity of sense. Machu Picchu stands as proof that civilizations can vanish not only by being overpowered, but by becoming unreadable. This is uncomfortable because it undermines a modern faith in preservation. We tend to believe that if we protect material remains, meaning will follow. Machu Picchu quietly disagrees. It shows that meaning is carried by systems, by shared practices, assumptions, rhythms of life. When those systems collapse quickly, material preservation can actually sharpen the sense of loss rather than soften it. Everything here still works. Nothing here explains itself. The terraces still manage water with astonishing efficiency. The walls still fit together with seismic intelligence. The alignments still catch light at moments that once mattered deeply, but the why, the lived urgency behind these choices, no longer exists as experience. It survives only as inference. And inference, no matter how careful, is not the same as inheritance. This is why Machu Picchu feels strangely modern in a world filled with systems whose complexity exceeds individual understanding. Many people already live among structures they cannot fully read. Networks that deliver food, energy, information, and stability operate largely unseen. As long as they function, they feel natural. When they break, they suddenly feel alien. Machu Picchu offers a distant preview of that sensation, of standing inside something perfectly built, yet fundamentally opaque. The Incas did not anticipate this afterlife for their city. They did not build Machu Picchu to endure without context. They built it to function within a precise cultural logic. When that logic vanished, the city did not adapt. It simply remained, and remaining is not the same as surviving. As the narrative moves deeper into this realization, Machu Picchu begins to resemble not a lost city, but a boundary, a line beyond which preservation cannot recover meaning, beyond which explanation becomes approximation, beyond which the past cannot be made whole again, only approached. This boundary is what gives the site its emotional weight. Visitors often describe a sense of awe mixed with unease. The beauty is undeniable, the skill is overwhelming, but there is also a quiet dislocation, the sense of standing inside a sentence whose grammar is gone. You recognize the words, you cannot hear the voice. Machu Picchu does not resolve this tension, it sustains it, and in doing so it offers one of the clearest insights any ancient place can provide. That civilizations do not only risk physical collapse, they risk interpretive collapse, the sudden loss of the frameworks that make their world make sense. High above the clouds, the city holds that truth without commentary. It does not accuse, it does not warn. It simply remains, precise, intact, and just beyond full understanding, a reminder that continuity of form is never the same as continuity of meaning. That difference between form and meaning is where Machu Picchu settles into its most enduring role. The city no longer belongs to the Incas alone, nor to historians, nor to the millions who now pass through it each year. It occupies a quieter space, one defined by recognition rather than explanation. Machu Picchu shows that civilizations can leave behind structures that remain technically brilliant long after the reasons for their brilliance have vanished. What survives is not intention but consequence. This is why the city feels both complete and unfinished at the same time. Nothing here demands reconstruction. There is no sense that a missing piece must be restored for the site to make sense. And yet something essential is absent, not a wall or a roof, but a way of seeing. The city's silence is not emptiness, it is the absence of a shared worldview that once made every alignment, every terrace, every path feel obvious. In this way, Machu Picchu becomes a study in thresholds. It sits at the threshold between nature and design, refusing to belong fully to either. It stands at the threshold between use and abandonment, having crossed that line without damage. and it exists at the threshold between past and present, intact enough to confront us, distant enough to resist. Familiarity. Most places that survive across centuries do so by changing. Machu Picchu survives by not having changed at all. That stability, paradoxically, is what makes it feel so fragile. It depends entirely on systems outside itself now, on regulation, restraint, and collective agreement not to overwhelm it. The city that once survived through withdrawal now survives through limits imposed by others. This inversion is telling. The Incas protected Machu Picchu by leaving it. We protect it by managing it. Both approaches recognize the same truth, that this place cannot endure unlimited pressure. That scale, once exceeded, would undo what precision preserved. Machu Picchu's continued existence is therefore not guaranteed by admiration alone, but by discipline, the willingness to accept that some things must remain constrained to remain meaningful. As the story moves forward from here, it begins to loosen its focus on Machu Picchu itself. The city has done its work. It has demonstrated how a civilization can build something exact, leave it intact, and still lose its meaning through sudden systemic collapse. What remains is the broader implication of that lesson. Because Machu Picchu is not an isolated case, it is one expression of a larger human vulnerability. The assumption that what we build can outlast the systems that give it sense. The city reminds us that continuity of stone does not protect continuity of understanding. That knowledge, when embedded too deeply in practice and not shared widely, can vanish faster than walls ever will. High above the valleys, Machu Picchu remains suspended in this realization. Not as a ruin warning of collapse, but as a place that quietly demonstrates how complete a loss of context can be, even when nothing appears broken. And with that understanding in place, the narrative prepares to move again, away from the city as an object and toward what it reveals about empires, memory, and the fragile relationship between survival and significance. As the story begins to tilt toward the present, Machu Picchu stops being something we look at and becomes something we look through. The city does not instruct modern societies in how to build. It reveals how they remember, what is chosen to be preserved, what is allowed to fade, and what is translated into symbols simple enough to circulate widely. Machu Picchu survives not just because of stone, but because it fits a story the modern world is willing to tell, a story about discovery, endurance, and lost wisdom above the clouds. That story is not false, but it is incomplete. What often disappears in retelling is the city's original restraint. Machu Picchu is celebrated as a triumph of engineering, yet its most radical quality is limitation. It was not built to dominate territory. It did not extract endlessly. It did not expand once completed in a world that equates success with growth. This restraint is quietly unsettling. It suggests that some systems are strongest when they know when to stop. Modern engagement with Machu Picchu struggles with this idea. The city is protected, but also promoted. Access is regulated, yet demand grows. Preservation depends on visibility, but visibility brings pressure. Each solution introduces a new tension. Machu Picchu is now sustained by a global system of attention that resembles, in a different form, the coordination that once sustained it under the Incas. The difference is that this new system values experience rather than alignment, access rather than precision. This shift changes how the city functions. Original length, 18,287 characters. Machu Picchu no longer functions to organize time, ritual practice, or governance structures. Instead, it organizes visitor expectation. It transforms into a destination shaped by predetermined schedules, circulating images, and narratives prepared well in advance. Visitors arrive having already absorbed what they're supposed to feel, or gets anticipated. Meaning arrives pre-packaged. The city faces demands to perform, yet it pushes back against these demands. Regardless of how frequently it gets photographed, Machu Picchu refuses collapsing into a single interpretation. The actual experience always exceeds whatever explanation gets offered or falls just short of it. Something consistently remains beyond grasp. The mountains disrupt sightlines, weather, conditions refuse consistency. The city appears and disappears within the same visit. Precision coexists alongside uncertainty. This resistance didn't happen by accident. It represents the residue of a worldview that valued relationship over revelation. Machu Picchu wasn't constructed to be comprehended all at once. It unfolds gradually instead. Paths take turns, different levels reveal themselves in sequence. The city rewards patient engagement, not rushed consumption. In doing so, it quietly pushes back against the modern impulse to consume. Meaning instantly. It cannot be skimmed without losing something essential. At this point, Machu Picchu becomes more than a historical site. It becomes a test of whether modern societies can engage with complexity without flattening it, of whether preservation can coexist with humility, of whether meaning can be approached without being forced into conclusion. The city doesn't demand the right answer, it demands the right pace. As the narrative approaches its final movement, Machu Picchu settles into this role, not as a relic of a lost empire, but as a living question. One that asks how civilizations remember what they no longer know how to live inside. How they honor restraint in a world built on expansion. How they protect places whose power lies in not being fully explained. High above the clouds, the city continues to do what it has always done best. It doesn't shout, it doesn't instruct, it waits. And in that waiting, it invites a different relationship with the past, one that accepts distance, respects limits, and understands that not all wisdom survives by being made permanent. Waiting in this case isn't passivity. It represents pressure held in stillness. Machu Picchu waits the way mountains wait, without expectation, without urgency, without the need to be resolved. And in doing so, it exposes a deep contrast with the modern world where value is often tied to immediacy, clarity, and return. The city offers none of these easily. It gives presence, not answers. This is where Machu Picchu's modern significance sharpens. In a time when systems are built to scale endlessly, the city stands as evidence of a different philosophy, one that treated limitation not as failure, but as design. Its terraces don't chase maximum yield, they stabilize. Its buildings don't seek monumentality, they seek fit. Its location doesn't optimize access, it enforces effort. Nothing here happened by accident, and nothing here is excessive. That restraint isn't romantic, it's practical. The Incas understood that environments like this cannot be pushed indefinitely. Altitude punishes overreach, weather rewards patience. Mountains don't forgive shortcuts. Machu Picchu's endurance comes not from strength, but from respect. Respect encoded in stone, drainage, alignment, and scale. Modern societies often encounter this logic too late. We tend to build first, adapt later, to expand until resistance appears. Machu Picchu reverses that order. It assumes resistance from the beginning. It builds inward, not outward. It anticipates limits rather than discovering them. And when those limits could no longer be honored, when the system that sustained alignment collapsed, the city withdrew instead of forcing continuation. This choice is what separates Machu Picchu from many great cities of the past. It didn't try to survive its own context. That decision preserved it physically, but it also transformed it into something rare, a place that embodies completion rather than endurance. Most civilizations leave behind ruins of struggle, evidence of collapse, conquest, or exhaustion. Machu Picchu leaves behind coherence, a city finished, then left intact, then sealed by circumstance. As the narrative moves toward its closing arc, This coherence becomes the center of gravity. Machu Picchu no longer needs to be explained through function or history alone. Its deepest contribution lies in what it reveals about choice, about knowing when a system no longer fits the world it helped shape. This isn't a lesson about abandoning complexity, it's a lesson about listening to it. The city shows that complexity demands constant alignment, that when alignment fails, persistence isn't always wisdom, that sometimes the most durable act is withdrawal. These ideas sit uncomfortably in modern thinking, where continuity is prized above all else. Machu Picchu challenges that. Priority quietly, without argument. High above the clouds, the stones remain where they were placed, not insisting on relevance, not asking to be used again. They simply demonstrate that something can be built with extraordinary care, serve its purpose fully, and then step aside without being broken. And in that demonstration, Machu Picchu offers its final mirror, not of collapse, but of completion. Completion changes how a place speaks. Once Machu Picchu is understood as something that ended by choice rather than force, its presence in the modern world becomes more complicated. The city is no longer a puzzle waiting to be solved. It becomes a measure of how contemporary societies deal with things that cannot be improved, expanded, or fully explained without being diminished. Machu Picchu doesn't fit comfortably into modern categories of value. It cannot be upgraded, it cannot be optimized, it cannot be made more efficient without losing what makes it what it is. Its worth lies precisely in the fact that it resists modification. This places it at odds with a world structured around iteration and growth. The ethical tension begins here. To protect Machu Picchu, modern systems must intervene, paths must be reinforced, numbers must be limited, stone must be stabilized. Each action preserves the city physically while altering the conditions of its existence. The Incas preserved Machu Picchu by leaving it alone. We preserve it by managing it constantly. Both approaches recognize fragility. They simply respond to it differently. This raises an uncomfortable question. Can something be preserved without being transformed by the act of preservation itself? Machu Picchu exists today within a framework of global attention. It is photographed, narrated, scheduled, ranked. Its image circulates far beyond its physical location. For many people, Machu Picchu is experienced long before it is visited, and sometimes instead of being visited. The city becomes an idea first, a place second. That shift matters. When a place becomes iconic, its meaning begins to harden. Complexity is smoothed so it can travel. Ambiguity is reduced so it can be explained quickly. Machu Picchu risks becoming a symbol of endurance or mystery rather than what it actually represents. A civilization's decision to build with limits and to stop when alignment could no longer be maintained. This simplification isn't malicious, it's structural. Modern culture struggles to hold incomplete meanings. We prefer conclusions to questions, lessons to tensions. Machu Picchu refuses that preference. Its significance lies not in what it teaches explicitly, but in what it refuses to resolve. It offers no clear instruction for the future. It only demonstrates that alternatives to endless continuation once existed and were taken seriously. In this way, Machu Picchu becomes less about the Incas and more about us. It forces modern societies to confront their relationship with success, with the assumption that what works should always work more, with the discomfort of acknowledging that some systems, no matter how brilliant, are context-bound. The city's quiet dignity comes from its refusal to adapt beyond its moment. It didn't reinvent itself endlessly. It remained correct until correctness was no longer possible. That choice echoes uncomfortably in a world where retreat is often framed as failure. Machu Picchu suggests that withdrawal can be ethical, that stepping aside can preserve meaning more effectively than persistence, that there's a difference between survival and integrity. These ideas are difficult to translate into modern policy or practice, but they linger as questions rather than prescriptions. High above the valleys, the city now exists as a boundary object, something that different cultures, disciplines, and generations interpret differently without exhausting it. Archaeology, tourism, conservation, philosophy all touch it, but none fully claim it. Machu Picchu remains partially out of reach, and that distance protects it as much as any regulation. As the story moves deeper into this final phase, the city's role becomes clearer. It isn't a warning about collapse nor a celebration of lost wisdom. It's a reminder that not all success seeks continuity, and not all endings are failures. Some are conclusions chosen with care. And in that reminder, Machu Picchu continues to wait, not for discovery, not for explanation, but for attention capable of holding restraint without needing to overcome it. That kind of attention is rare. It requires resisting the urge to finish the story, to turn Machu Picchu into a lesson that can be neatly carried away. The city doesn't reward that impulse. It offers something slower and more demanding, the recognition that some achievements are defined not by what follows them, but by where they stop. Machu Picchu sits at that stopping point. For the Incas, the city was never meant to be a beginning. It wasn't a prototype for expansion, not a seed from which future cities would grow. It was an expression of a moment when alignment between land, sky, labor, and belief was briefly exact. When that alignment fractured, the city didn't attempt to survive by changing its nature. It preserved coherence by ending. This represents an unfamiliar idea in modern culture. We tend to treat longevity as virtue in itself. Projects that end are framed as failures. Systems that withdraw are seen as obsolete. Machu Picchu disrupts that narrative. It shows that endurance without alignment can hollow meaning, and that survival at any cost isn't the same as integrity. The city's power comes from the fact that it didn't compromise its purpose in order to continue existing. What remains today isn't a living city, but a living boundary, a boundary between growth and restraint, between preservation and transformation, between what can be explained and what must be accepted as distant. This boundary is why Machu Picchu continues to unsettle even as it inspires. It doesn't invite replication, it cannot be scaled, its values cannot be extracted cleanly and applied elsewhere. The city resists becoming a model. It insists on being specific. That specificity is its final gift. Machu Picchu reminds us that civilizations are capable of designing places that are meant to be complete rather than perpetual. That success doesn't always require continuation. That meaning can be preserved not by adapting endlessly, but by knowing when adaptation would erode purpose. As the story settles into its final posture, the city no longer feels like something lost and found. It feels like something finished and remembered. Imperfectly, the clouds still move through it, the mountains still frame it, the stones still hold their lines. Nothing here is asking to be returned to use. The city above the clouds doesn't argue for the past. It doesn't predict the future. It simply stands as evidence that another relationship with success once existed, one where restraint wasn't a weakness and completion wasn't an ending to be feared. And in that evidence, Machu Picchu offers its quiet conclusion that what endures most clearly isn't always what lasts the longest, but what knows when its work is done. And once that idea settles, the story no longer needs to push forward. Machu Picchu reaches its end not with disappearance, but with clarity. The city doesn't fade into irrelevance, nor does it resolve into a single meaning. It remains suspended between earth and sky, between use and memory, between explanation and silence. That suspension isn't accidental. It's the state the city was always moving toward once its moment had passed. What Machu Picchu ultimately leaves behind isn't instruction, but orientation. It reorients how we think about achievement. about what it means for something to be successful, about whether continuation is always the highest goal. The city suggests that there are forms of success that are measured, not by endurance, but by completeness. This represents a difficult idea to accept in a world built on continuity. Modern societies tend to equate survival with legitimacy. Systems are praised for their ability to adapt endlessly, to absorb shock, to grow beyond original intent. Machu Picchu presents an alternative logic. It shows that some systems are designed to be exact rather than flexible, precise rather than scalable. When the conditions that made that precision possible disappear, the system doesn't reinvent itself. It ends intact. That ending isn't tragic, it's coherent. The city's stones still align with mountains that mattered. Its terraces still stabilize slopes that would otherwise collapse. Its drainage still channels water the way it always has. Everything continues to function even without purpose. And that's the quiet paradox at the heart of Machu Picchu, a place that still works, even though the world it worked for is gone. This paradox is what gives the city its lasting power. Machu Picchu doesn't warn us about collapse. It warns us about misreading success, about assuming that what should endure must always do so, about confusing persistence with wisdom. It reminds us that civilizations can choose restraint, can accept completion, and can step aside without being erased. High above the clouds, the city remains in that choice. Not ruined, not revived, not resolved. It stands as a rare example of a civilization leaving something behind without trying to make it eternal. A place built with care, used with intention, and released without violence. Its silence isn't loss, it's conclusion. And that's where the story rests, not because there's nothing more to say, but because Machu Picchu has already said everything it needed to, in stone, in space, and in the decision to stop. The final connection Machu Picchu makes isn't dramatic, it's quiet, and that's intentional. The city doesn't reach forward into the future demanding relevance. It doesn't try to justify itself through lessons or predictions. It simply remains high, above the valleys, allowing each generation to encounter it with its own assumptions and limits. Machu Picchu's power lies in this restraint. It refuses to finish the thought for us. In the modern world where systems are expected to persist indefinitely, this refusal is unsettling. We're accustomed to projects that promise continuity, to solutions designed to scale, to structures meant to outlive their creators. Machu Picchu offers a different posture. It shows that some achievements are meant to be bounded. That meaning can be preserved by stopping rather than continuing, that stepping aside can be a form of wisdom rather than surrender. This doesn't make Machu Picchu superior to modern cities. It makes it legible in a different way. The Incas didn't build the city to be admired centuries later. They built it to be right for a specific place within a specific worldview at a specific moment. When that moment passed, they didn't force the city into a new role, they let it go. In doing so, they preserved its integrity, even as its meaning drifted beyond reach. Today, Machu Picchu exists inside a paradox. It's one of the most recognized places on Earth, yet it remains partially unknowable. Millions see it, photograph it, describe it. Few truly explain it, and that gap between visibility and understanding isn't a failure of research. It's the natural result of a world encountering something built for a way of thinking it no longer inhabits. The city doesn't resist this misunderstanding. It absorbs it. Clouds pass through the ruins as they always have, interrupting certainty. Weather shifts without regard for schedules. The mountains continue to dominate perspective. Machu Picchu still controls the terms of engagement. It slows attention, it frustrates conclusion, it reminds those who stand within it that not all meaning is meant to be extracted. This is the city's final act. Not instruction, not warning, but presence. Machu Picchu remains above the clouds not because it escaped history, but because it accepted its place within it. It didn't seek to endure at all costs. It sought to be complete, and in choosing completion over continuation, it left behind something rare, a place that doesn't argue for its importance, but quietly demonstrates another way civilizations once understood success. The world below will continue to change. Systems will rise, adapt, strain, and transform. Certainty will be built and rebuilt. Above it all, Machu Picchu will remain still, not frozen, not forgotten, but finished. A city that knew when its work was done and trusted that silence would be enough, and silence holds, not as emptiness but as space left intentionally open. Machu Picchu doesn't linger to be interpreted one last time. It doesn't wait for consensus or closure. It remains as it has for centuries, balanced, restrained, unconcerned with whether it's fully understood. The city's final gift isn't knowledge, but proportion, a reminder that human achievement doesn't have to announce itself to endure, and that some meanings are strongest when they're not forced into permanence. What survives here isn't a blueprint for the future, but a posture toward it, one that accepts limits without fear, one that allows completion without regret, one that understands that not every success must become infinite to matter. Above the clouds, the stones keep their lines, the mountains keep their watch, the city keeps its silence. And in that silence, Machu Picchu remains what it has always been, not a ruin, not a mystery, but a finished thought left carefully in the world.